Welcome to the 2023 OperationAll panel. Before I get started, I'd like to do a few thank yous. Thanks to our DEI Director, Tiffany Trusty. Thank you to our Communications Director, Amber Peckham. And thanks to our President-elect, Joy Neely. In addition, thank you to all of our amazing members and sponsors for making this all possible. And thanks again to the panelists in advance for donating their time today. So I will do a quick intro on myself. We have a fun-filled and packed panel with some great discussion topics. My name is Ben Phillips. I'm a board member and treasurer of Women in High Tech. I'm also a director at Katz, Sapper, and Miller, CPAs and advisors in our audit and assurance practice, one of the leaders of our IT risk and IT advisory and audit practice. So I'll start off with the mission of Women in High Tech for some of you that may not be too familiar with our organization. Women in High Tech exists to change the landscape of women represented in STEM fields, to be equally inclusive to all. So this panel is, the whole focus is, OperationAll. So what is it? This may be the first time you're joining. So OperationAll is an annual celebration that we Women in High Tech host each year. Each year, has its own flavor to it. What we've learned is when men and women work together as allies, we build a more innovative and fulfilling workplace and culture. The journey begins through intentional interactions between women and men as friends, colleagues, mentors, and sponsors. So I'm going to answer one question first. It's, what is male allyship? So the definition or response is really unique to each individual answering it. To me, it's any man that is willing to advocate and speak up in support of gender equality. It can include characteristics such as sharing opportunities, publicly celebrating accomplishments, sharing the non-promotable workload, being a sponsor or a mentor, and really being visible and intentional with your actions, and not a silent partner. I'm going to dig into a couple statistics just in women in the STEM fields. So per the census.gov, in 1970, women made up of 38% of US workers and 8% of STEM workers. In 2019, women made up of 48% of US workers and 27% of STEM workers. So with that, I'm going to do a quick introduction of our esteemed panelists. So first off, I got Prasanna Parthasarathy. He's the CEO of Medvantx, a non-commercial dispensing pharmacy licensed in all 50 states. He's got experience as an operating partner with a healthcare investment outfit, as well as had leadership roles at Becton Dickinson and CareFusion, as well as GE Healthcare. He has completed a bachelor's in mechanical engineering, a master's in computer engineering, and an MBA. Next up is Dan Byrne. He is the AVP, or Associate Vice President of Market Access, Diabetes, Incretins at Eli Lilly. He's been there for, I think, roughly 20 years. He was a key leader in growing the Male Allies Network at Eli Lilly to over 500 active members. And he's got a bachelor's of economics. So Dan, I can relate to you, just bachelor strong over here too. And then we got Darrick. He's a partner at Barnes & Thornburg. He's an intellectual property counselor and litigator. He has got a bachelor's degree of chemistry and Latin and a JD from IU. He's also a board member of multiple nonprofit organizations. So with that, we have 4 questions. We're really just going to do a round robin. So we'll start with the first question is to the panel. Why do you think women are underrepresented in STEM fields? So whoever wants to go first, have at it.
Well, I unmuted, so I guess I'll go first then. I want to thank the panelists for allowing me to get into this esteemed group after listening to their backgrounds. I feel like I'm not qualified. Although I guess male allyship doesn't have any qualifications to it. To be honest, I read the question and I wasn't really sure. I knew that there was significant lack of representation at the higher levels of companies when you think 50, 40, 30, 20 going up the chain, but I wasn't sure. And so I did some research and you actually stole some of my statistics. But what I thought was one of the most interesting things was I think it starts really young. So one of the research papers I read talked about aptitude tests being given to high school students. And the aptitude test showed that the aptitude women have is 10 times closer to STEM careers than it is actually the interests. So their aptitude and their interests are divergent. And the actual opposite is true for education and art, where their aptitude is 2 to 5 times less than it is for their interest levels. And so to me, it kind of starts really early. I mean, I don't know that this industry is significantly worse in terms of when you look at graduation rates in those particular fields. And then once you look at the workforce as they come into the field, I think you shared some of those numbers there. It's a delta in total workforce of 20 points, but the graduation rates are about 36% of STEM are female. So I'm not sure that delta is that big. I think it's a matter of how do you get more women and MGM talent interested in STEM fields at a younger age. That's likely a long-term built-in bias into our high school guidance or high school or even grade school culture. But it's not one that I would pretend to be that knowledgeable in today. I did read about one recommendation, which I thought was really interesting, is likely in place in some schools, which was making STEM courses a mandate for graduation. So gauging people not based on what they see from society as to what their interest should be, but actually putting them in a course and determining whether the aptitude and the interest actually can match up. So ensuring that those are, mandated requirements for graduation. So I think that's the best answer I could give as being somebody who's not as knowledgeable about the subject.
Yeah, and I'll go next. I think you hit the nail on the head, Ben, with your stats, and then Dan with the stats that you gave. So it starts early. I think, Ben, you said 27 to 28% of the workforce, as it relates to women, are in STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math. But it starts early, like Dan stated. So only 20%, and my stat is lower than yours, Dan. Only 20% of women have bachelor's degrees in physics, engineering, computer science, and other, complex sciences. So why are they underrepresented? It starts early. I think there are social and environmental factors. It's teaching, girls and boys early on that there are clearly delineated, socially prescribed gender roles. And I think that translates into what we, who we become and what we pursue. And so early on, it's boys, you do math, science, things, engineering, things of that nature. Women, you focus on artsy stuff, creative stuff. And I think that if we change that mindset, if we change that line of thinking, that line of communication, I think it leads to a reprogramming that, if you think about the contributions, and I'll talk about this later, of women in STEM, they far exceed that of men, right? So the stats don't lie in the end. So, but I think it's communication and the social and environmental factors that we lay very early on, and that leads to underrepresentation. The other thing I would say is I think that we don't promote, right? I think that we don't respect and promote women enough. So they feel like they have the voice in the room just as loud and substantial as men. And this isn't just STEM, this is across, the span of different, occupations. And I would say if we promote, like you said, Ben, and support and listen, the underrepresentation of women wouldn't be an issue, not in this day and age.
Yeah, great points, Ben. Maybe I'll chime in here. First off, thank you to you, Ben, and the Women in High Tech team. Looking forward to this discussion and also learning from the fellow panelists here. I think the issue has been pretty clear, right? Like at the end of the day, great companies are built by understanding the articulated needs and unarticulated needs of the customer. You're not going to get there by having a team that thinks the same way. You want to have meritocracy of ideas. So I think constitutionally, in a way, within the company, from a culture perspective, you want to make sure that you are welcoming diverse perspectives when it comes to decision making, and you want to have all the best ideas on the table when it comes to involving the organization relative to how you think about hiring practices, how you think about including people in decision making and having open access to the broader ecosystem. And when it comes to STEM, the issue is real, right? I mean, whether the number is 20% or 25% or less, the reality is 1 in 5 engineers graduating today in the country are women engineers. And that number has only shifted by less than 1% over the last decade or more. So I think like my fellow panelists covered the need to focus on the middle school and the high schools in the country to ensure that there is enough mentoring and development happening in order to encourage women to participate more in these things. And also the other issue is we are moving to an era where AI, robotics, and a lot of these other advanced technologies are going to make a broader impact on society at large. Underrepresentation of different types of thinking relative to how the robotics work or how we are thinking about the empathy factor when it comes to coding different decision-making styles into how we think about the future becomes really important. So it's kind of a very important topic that we have to address in a hurry, because making progress by less than 1% over the next decade in this topic is going to cause problems. Otherwise, you're going to have men making a lot of robots that's going to keep forgetting things and, or spend a lot of time doing nothing, among others. So we want to make sure that we are addressing this important dynamic in our workforce.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for those responses. So now we'll go to the next question to the panel. What does male allyship mean to you? And in no order, speak. First come, first serve.
Yeah, I can go. I mean, the one topic I would I saw it as I was researching on this topic. I saw this Women in Workplace survey that was conducted by McKinsey recently, where they talked to over 40,000 people representing 300 plus companies. And a couple of stats that stood out in my mind were the voluntary attrition rate among women is significantly higher than men. And a couple of top reasons why women are leaving the workplace at an increasing pace is one, being flexibility in workplace. I think that's a real issue that we need to address. And then the second issue is also around leadership support, development, having a voice and access, etc. Only 8% of men feel their gender played a part in them not getting a raise or a promotion, while 37% of the women felt the same way. To me, kind of the lack of awareness and filters we use are critical when we think about how organizations need to function and when we think about male allyship, right? I'm not a big fan of culture posters. I'm a fan of action over words. And we all have a responsibility to ensure that we are fostering growth and fostering meritocracy in ideas when we think about how we make decisions that impact the company and impact the team broadly. I think those are some factors I would consider.
I would say it's sort of the response to why women are underrepresented, right? So it's sort of hitting those reasons head on. That's what true allyship, is as it relates from the male perspective. So for me, it's, coaching women on their work and give valuable feedback to them, in their performance, while at the same time amplifying their voices and celebrating their accomplishments. I think that one of the panelists just hit on this. You provide support through mentorship and sponsorship. What does that lead to? More professional career development opportunities, within the field of STEM. And I think that if you're able to connect women within these smaller networks, they'll see that there are commonalities that exist. They're not alone, right? And what they do. And then, and this is important to me, is sort of speaking up against the stereotypes, right? And making sure that the people in the room understand that their opinion is just as important, and quite honestly, if not more important. And that comes in, different forms. It's if, a woman in the room provides an opinion or suggestion, it's not taking that and adopting it as your own, right? And giving attribution. It's making sure that if you have a dais of speakers, that women are involved. It is making sure that when women provide sort of the diversity of thought, it's included in the calculus of what happens within the workplace. That's allyship.
Yeah, I agree with both panelists. I think, I'm a white male, mid 40s, 2 kids, married, Christian, straight. I fit all of the majority group members aspects. And it took me until about 6-7 years ago to acknowledge that I might actually have not earned everything that I've earned. It doesn't mean that I didn't work hard. It doesn't mean that I'm not smart or that I can have an impact. But I have to understand the privilege that I have in order to acknowledge the bias that exists. And so in my view, male allyship, I think, starts within. Like I can believe that I'm supporting and minority group members or females or those that are different than me in a room. But if I haven't taken the time to understand how I might be hearing what's coming from them, or not acknowledging that their approach may be different, their thoughts may be different, and why I may not do that, it's really hard to be an active ally for a long period of time. So I always encourage people to kind of start from within. I think the best example I can give is that if I look back at my career, until the moment that my wife and I had this conversation, I could acknowledge that I had sexist background, I had sexist tendencies, and I had to work really hard to avoid that. There was gender bias that was there. I don't remember bias because it didn't happen to me. And so I think starting with that allows you then to take the steps forward to change your own behaviors and then change the behaviors of those that are around you, to do the things that the panelists talked about, whether it's sponsorship, mentorship, acknowledgement of great ideas. In fact, I'll share just a funny side story. My least favorite word in our company is piggyback. And I hate it because it's typically a man saying they'll piggyback a comment and then they get credit for that comment. And it's happened to me before. So I try to make sure that I don't repeat a comment at the end of a meeting, where I try to make sure that I encourage, or it's an attribution. I think that was the word that you used, was an attribution, where credit is given. But again, I would go back to, you have to start from within in order to continue to change on without. I think it's easy to put kind of structures and stuff into place, but that actually doesn't change your behavior, your bias, and your belief. And it's a hard first step. It was hard for me to admit. But once I got there, it was really cathartic, because I actually started seeing it in a ton of different meetings that I was in. And it wasn't overt always, but it was important that I could acknowledge it and see it. So I think that's where I would say is male allyship to me starts from changing from within before you can impact without.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. Moving on to our next question. What are some best practices you have seen in your career that successfully promoted equity and reduced unconscious bias? I'll start with, I don't get to answer questions because I did last year, but I'll start with a small story, just unconscious bias that I've seen in my career. So, my career for 12 years, been in public accounting, consulting. So with that, I got a badge of honor from Marriott as a lifetime, whatever it's called, titanium elite member, meaning that I've traveled a bunch. With that, whenever new projects come in, in any career, any industry, there's unconscious bias on who those opportunities get given to, right? So for me, I noticed it within, I can't remember the exact project, but essentially, there was a large project that required probably about 4 months a year of travel. I was identified as someone that could do that because I was, single, didn't own a couch yet, moved every single year, and slept in, random hotels. So me and another person ended up getting selected. But 3 months later, a female colleague of mine mentioned that she wished she would have gotten considered for that opportunity. It didn't come until 2 years later that I realized that she was probably passed up because, you know, she was just got married for 1 year, and someone maybe made an assumption that she didn't, you know, her family life didn't want to be away from home for that long over the course of the year. So I think the one thing I would say in that question would be just don't make assumptions and ask what, you know, what individuals want to do. So with that, I'll repeat the question because I just did a word vomit. What are some best practices that you have seen in your career that successfully promoted equity and reduced unconscious bias? So,
no, it's a great story there as well, Ben. The unfortunately, it's not a story. It's a real thing that's happening every day in many ways, right? I mean, if you look at unconscious bias, you know, it goes back even the seatbelt example. When they originally made the seatbelt in the auto industry, they only considered men driving, and that created a ton of problems around accident rates among women and children. And it was a lot more expensive later on as a society for them to fix it. And even in 2022, today, sticking with the auto example, we just got the first female dummy for crash testing, I believe, in out of Sweden or somewhere. And there's still a lot of bias around kind of the way we architect things, both from a product and as a society perspective. To me, I think the key component around ensuring that we are being humble, we are being inclusive as a society when it comes to how we treat diversity within workplace, right? Again, I'm a big fan of the meritocracy of ideas in general, and you want to have all different ideas from different perspectives, and you want the best and brightest ideas on the table when it comes to involving others in terms of how you make good choices as a company. And the other thing that I would also highlight is flexibility. Providing flexible work environment helps really attract the best and brightest to the company, as well as providing flexibility for people to try different roles, right, within the company relative to what they can do at that point in their life. And if they want to you know, shift based on changes in their life situation, you provide different opportunities. So to me, kind of understanding unconscious bias, having a culture where you welcome different perspectives, and making sure that you provide flexibility for different talent to flourish relative to work and life are all critical factors to consider.
Yeah, so, you know, partner at Burns and Thornburg, like you said, and I have a lot of client teams that I put together for any given client. And so recognizing that my client base is diverse, I think that the teams that we put together to deliver those services to our clients for any given matter needs to be diverse as well, across all levels, including gender diversity. And recognizing that when we pitch for work for any given client, that women are on that team, and that they're not powerless spectators, that they're on the team to speak to strategy, to speak to their background and depth of abilities, and how they would handle any given matter. The other is making sure that when the matter comes in the door, those women who spoke, right, who participated in that pitch, also work on the client matters, and that the client knows that, you know, these women are working on the matters, that our process is fluid throughout the entire, our strategy and how we approach it is fluid throughout the entire process. But other small things, making sure women are paid equally for the same role and responsibilities, right? Making sure that as we speak to unconscious bias, that when we all walk into any room, right, or we join any company or organization, that we all come in with the same level of talents, and that's why we were hired. That no one comes in at a disadvantage, and if we recognize one another's worth, I think that discrimination, racism, gender bias becomes moot.
That's a great point too.
I want to start actually with the words unconscious bias, because I use those all the time. And what I love to say is once you can make somebody aware of their unconscious bias, it's no longer unconscious. And the word unconscious provides safety for people. It allows them to say, well, I didn't know. So I think part of it is actually making sure people are aware when it occurs, because then they can no longer say, I wasn't aware, it was unconscious. At that point, it's just bias. And bias is a big, bad, ugly word. So I want to start with that. And then I'll give a couple like practical examples for me. So one thing I try to do is I take notes from my team. So I had noticed for a long period of time, and actually there's historical reference points in literature that shows it, that women have a tendency to take notes. And the standard commentary is, oh, well, they take notes better, they've got better handwriting, they type faster, etc. The problem when you're taking notes is you're not actively taking part of the conversation. So if I, as a leader, step in and take notes, I allow everybody in the room to be a part of the conversation. I've actually been scolded before because I take such good notes and they don't really want all of their words put on paper. But the point is I want to try to lean in and be able to take that off the table so it's not somebody else doing it. Another thing I try to do, and my work environment is one that it's not quite as flexible as I would like, but it's more flexible than it once was. But I try to make sure that my team knows openly that my priority is my family. So I'm going to leave early because today is actually a special day. I would usually be taking my daughter to gymnastics with her friend, but instead I'm just going to take my mom to gymnastics and bring them home because this was more important to me than driving on the way out. But I have soccer, we've got golf, we've got all kinds of activities. You know, today I had to stay home because my wife needed to go to work and I had to stay home with this little sick one at home. So I try to make sure my team is really aware of my priorities and I'm honest about it. Like I think the archetype of, you know, the male leader is super strong and doesn't show any emotion. I have zero interest in that. I don't want to be that. I want to be whole at work. I want to be able to share exactly who I am and what I am. And I feel like if I can live that, then that's going to allow more people to do the same. Another practical example is interview support. So we can always say like we wish everybody would be acknowledged for their specific acts and not having the bias involved. The reality is like interviews in and of themselves are typically done by people who look like me. Right. So that we try to make sure at our company we've got diverse panels, et cetera. But I do try to make sure that when I coach or mentor, I think one of the specific examples was give an example. So I had a female colleague of mine who was interviewing for a first leadership role and thought that the resume and the interview should speak for themselves. Now, this person was super talented, ready to be promoted. And I'm like, have you rallied the troops? No, I haven't done that. I don't know why I should do that. If you put together a book that shows about all the work and provides tactic and being able to walk her through, I said, would you feel like we're doing patients a disadvantage if you don't get that role? And she said, yes. And then I said, then you need to step into it as if that is the problem, that you're letting people down on the outside, not just yourself, and trying to describe like, hey, here's the scenario, here's the situation. It is what it is. We'll try to fix it, but it's not going to be fixed today. So providing things like interview support and acknowledging that the system doesn't always work in the way we'd like it to, but we can certainly operate to be more successful in it. And then the last one, which has been my favorite and probably by far the time periods that I've been most vulnerable and most grown, is reverse mentorships. So I think anytime you read Yahoo News, CNN, Fox News, whatever it is, there are stories about people you don't know. And there is naturally bias that's built in because of clickbait and everything else. People want to have those things that are built in. And so you're going to read the stories that reinforce your bias, whatever that is, one way or the other, right? Reverse mentorships are personal. They are deeply personal. You're looking somebody in the eye who is not telling you about the African-American journey or the women's journey. They're telling you about their journey. And it completely rips off the ability to say, well, that doesn't happen here. Because you invariably will hear horror stories that you hope didn't happen because they've never happened to me. So you hear these stories and it just becomes so deeply personal. It allows you to take these overall concepts and context and put them into a person and be able to look somebody in the eyes. And I have found that those reverse mentorships for me are incredibly growth driven. And then of course I try to give back. The big fear you have there is as a leader, you're going to fall into the trap of becoming the mentor, not the mentee. Our job and my job in that world is to ask questions and learn. And I find those to be incredibly powerful for me.
That's great points there, Dan. Ben, if you don't mind, I'll just want to double click. I'll not use the word piggyback, Dan. I'll just use the double click on what you said. I think the two topics, right, that I want to kind of emphasize. One is this concept around bias, right? Subconscious, unconscious, whatever, where we came from, whatever is logic, right? The reality is it exists and it's going to continue to exist in some form. Like one of the examples I saw was symphony orchestra in the U.S. It used to be around 5% women participation, not because there were not many women musicians available, but just because of the bias, right? Over time, what they started doing was putting when they were selecting people, they were putting the candidates behind a curtain so they could not see who they were picking, but they had to pick based on the music, right? And all of a sudden, that number significantly shifted, right, in terms of how many people got selected that were representative of the society. The other topic is this thing called, Dunning-Kruger effect, where, we sometimes overestimate the cognitive bias around how much we know about any given thing. And this is not the Dunning-Kruger research, but what I've seen is men typically feel more confident about new things in general than they should be sometimes. And this kind of ties back to the topic around learning and development and making sure that people have both the support from a sponsorship perspective, but also from a standpoint of learning and development, and having an organization that's openness to, it's okay to fail in some roles, and being able to provide opportunities for growth with the right support and right ecosystem are going to be critical as we try to expand the boundaries of what we can or cannot do.
Thank you so much. Very well said. Clearly awesome. So we have one more question, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A from those that have messaged into the chat function. The last question we have is, what actionable strategies would you leave the aspiring male allies in the audience? Question mark. I'll answer one for myself. You got to help for me in my industry of professional service. One actionable thing that I'm doing right now is, for those women that have elevated to a leader, a role of manager, senior associate, or what have you, you got to kind of somewhat be vulnerable with them to get them to listen, and also listen to them to get them to connect with you in a way that you can help them, right? Male allyship, it's not a one-way street. So that person needs to trust you first before they would even offer or think about taking any advice from you. But for me, I think, Prasanna, one of the points you may have made, or maybe it was someone else that just talked, the point basically was men may be confident in things that we don't know about. To me, I'm very transparent. Like, I talk about things I don't know about all the time, and I just have Google. And I learned something new. I'm a CPA, but I deal with AWS, GCP, GitHub, what have you. And there was a lot of time when I didn't know anything. So really explaining, what do you do when you don't know something, right? And just things that I've learned sometimes by myself, but sharing that, like, hey, it's okay not to know everything. And sometimes it's okay to ask the client or someone that is an expert in this to learn about it, because it doesn't show that you don't know what you're talking about. It just shows that you're interested, and you'll follow back up. So, one thing is, to me, is just make sure you invest in those around you, because that's going to create tangible value going forward. With that, the question, what actionable strategies would you leave the aspiring male allies in the audience?
I wouldn't mind going first, because I want to double click on something you said. I'm a part of another nonprofit. I was a board member for a group called IWL, which similar mission, vision, something I feel very passionate about. And they ran the first male ally survey. And to the point that men think we're better and smarter at new things than we actually are, the survey showed that men think they're amazing allies. And then they asked the people they're supposed to be allying for, and they think they're terrible allies. So I think the first step, as I said before, is just acknowledgement. Like, you may not be a great ally, but the point is you're on the call. Like, you have the investment, you're ready to move forward. And so doing a little bit of a self-inventory around where you're biased, why you're biased, and doing the research. So whether you're invested in this because it's the right thing to do ethically, morally, and you feel good about it, or the power of the purse and knowing, I think maybe Darrick said, I can't remember who said it, but our consumers that we support don't look all like me. They look like other people. And so having a good understanding that companies that have more DE&I are going to perform better. So either one of those reasons is a great reason to get invested. Then the second thing is to do the research. So I think the McKinsey stuff was brought up. Power of the purse has been brought up. There are all kinds of journey literature that you can read out there about how different people than you experience their life and their workplace. And again, those will be generalized. The third step would be something like a reverse mentorship. So personalize it. And then the last thing I would encourage people to do is, if there is a group, whether it's a women's group or a male ally group, join it. The only bad step you can take is not taking any step at all. The first time I joined the women's group at Lilly, I was a part of the leadership team, and I was the only male in the room listening to women talk about how bad men were as allies. And I'm like, we're talking to the wrong people here. Like, I'm the only one in the room, and I'm not even really here like for the right reasons. And so I think just making sure that you take a step to join or to create and craft and grow one. That would be my kind of like stepwise approach about those. Are all actionable things that just require a little bit of effort and a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of vulnerability to acknowledge it. So therefore you can kind of change the world around you while you change yourself.
I would say if you are a person who, or a male, who is in a position of authority or influence, it's the true recognition of this, that gender diversity across all levels of organizational leadership leads to more innovation, profitability, and better decision-making, okay? Having that as your backdrop, and especially if you are a white male, provide support through mentorship and sponsorship. Speak up against stereotypes of all kinds throughout the entire fabric of the organization. And I think, Dan, you hit this. Let your ego go, get out of your way, and be ready for the uncomfortable conversations into situations that I will tell you will push you forward if you confront them head on. The last thing, bring in more allies. The more people see you doing this, the more they'll recognize that this is important and it'll move your company forward.
Great. I wouldn't repeat all the great points that Dan and Darrick already talked to. A couple of things to leave you with, right? One, I think talent at the end of the day is the greatest competitive advantage any company can have. And I think there's enough stats out there that shows that diverse companies that have the concept around meritocracy of ideas and inclusive culture, they outpace non-diverse companies in a significant way, right? So it's really important to make sure we are thinking different. And back to what I said earlier around knowing the what we know about customer demand and what we don't know about customer demand. You really want to be thoughtful around the team you assemble relative to figuring out the future. The second thing is there's a lot of talk about diversity training, kind of holding stats. In our case, we went about trying to find the best people for the roles that we have that are representative of our customers and kind of what we are trying to solve for. And it happens so that 50% of my leadership team are women, but we didn't really set that as a goal, saying that we're going to go find X% women, right? So I think we really need to kind of be thoughtful around how we think about assembling team, how we think about what we want as representative factors in decision making. And adult learning, we are terrible at adult learning in general, right? Across the board. And just by sending people for diversity training doesn't automatically fix diversity issues, right? We need to have a culture where leaders lead by example, we stay humble, and we make sure that all voices are being heard, and it's okay to have disagreements and it's okay to hear each other's perspective. And some of the topics that already came up around being humble, accepting failure if there is one, and making sure we're constantly on a quest to be the best version of ourselves are all critical at the end of the day when it comes to building a lasting impact as a company and across as a society as well. So thank you.
Thank you all. We've got a couple of great questions in the chat. The first one double clicks on your many mentions of how this starts early. So as great allies here today, what do you do to encourage the younger females to explore opportunities and interests in STEM?
I can go first, Tiffany. So I sit on the board of directors for ISAT. That's the Institute for Science and Education Technology. And our aim is to represent the underrepresented youth in the field of STEM. And so each year we host what is called a science symposium, where we have research, we call them exposés, but I was just research presentations given by both women or young girls and minority students as well, who present, and I will tell you, on a graduate level. But this is done because we have involved both corporations and professors at the respective universities around the Chicagoland area to act as mentors in this role. We also go into the high schools and we talk about what we do in our respective fields, whether I stated earlier that I'm an intellectual property attorney, but under the auspices of IP is what is called patent law, and that's the merger of science and law. So I talk about that, to the students, but then we have engineers that come in, we have doctors that come in, biologists, and they see this representation and they recognize that this could be them as well. And I'm telling you, like, for me as an African-American male early on, if but for representation outside of my environment or my community, I wouldn't be here today. Secondly, mentorship and sponsorship was an integral and indispensable part of my own development. So I would say sitting on boards of organizations of that ilk is key. Quite honestly, in your own home, right? If you see that there is sort of this divide between, let's say you have both, girls and, boys, in terms of your children, and you see a divide in terms of how they view things, have that conversation with them. Right? If you see something happening within the schools where, and I'll tell you, this happens where the schools are teaching the girls to go into certain fields versus the boys, have that conversation, sort of restructure the curriculum as well.
I've been totally transparent and honest. I don't think I'm doing enough. Like, I could say the caveat is you just closed out. I have 2 daughters and I'm going to try to encourage them. There's a funny side story. I once went to my daughter's kindergarten class, and instead of talking about my job, I made a joke that I was an astronaut, and it took 20 minutes for me to corral them back from the fact that I was not actually an astronaut. So I'm not sure I understood this problem enough to take it seriously until I was invited to this panel. I understood the challenge going north inside of our organizations. And as I read this, the challenge really isn't around life sciences. It's actually sort of the engineering, math, and tech portion of it that are bigger. And so I didn't have that visibility until this occurred. So I think, just transparently, I need to do more. I can do stuff certainly with encouraging our early career professionals at my company into going to maybe more tech or analytic kind of fields, because I do think we have an underrepresentation there. But I need to do more. And this was a great experience for me because I wasn't quite as aware as I needed to be.
Yeah, I would agree. I think like we all can do more, and I think like we do work with some nonprofit school here that deals with kids from homeless situation, and we are trying to do more around sponsoring here at Women in High Tech with Joy Neely being part of this group as well, among others. But I don't think we're doing enough broadly around how we can really help make an impact, right? I mean, clearly the easier thing for us to do is to work on the hiring practices, make sure that there is a slate of candidates that are appropriate, and talent and development and all the other things we talked about. But I think we all need to do more around the impact that we can all leave behind when it comes to younger kids who are coming through our middle school and high school, and how do we kind of inspire them to go into some of these career paths that they're not taking naturally at this point in time.
I'll go real quick, and mine's short. I would say, just show up, seek opportunities, make it your own. Like, I'm sure in Central Indiana, there's a plethora of many high schools all over the city, all over the state, that would just love the opportunity to have 3 successful individuals from the same company show up and talk to what you do about what you do to a group of students that would be interested in that. And when you do show up the way we just talked about, show up diverse, show up with, one of your female colleagues leading the way and explaining that. And I think with that, these female students could, see themselves in that individual and have an aspiration, because, we never know what our home lives are like. And statistics show it's not in the favor of the young female, right? So we have to show up and make an effort.
Ben, I'm going to double click. Completely agree. And Dan, I'll say this, honestly, at a smaller level, on career day, show up, talk about what you do or someone does in the field of STEM. And I will say, and I'll give a story. I showed up at a career day once and it was all men, right? And I talked to the person who put it together. I'm like, what happened? And she's like, when I was putting it together, I just went through my Rolodex and I just started calling people and I didn't recognize them. This is the lady who put it together. I didn't recognize until the very end, it was all men. And I'll go back to my point that representation counts. If young girls see women in these positions within STEM, they see it. They can believe it. They can latch onto that, honestly. And if they can see someone from their environment, right? I think it further enhances sort of their mindset of whether or not that's something they can aspire to do or be.
It's also a comment, I guess I would say, is you show up for the career fairs or the career days, but you also show up as the chaperone for the field trips. Like when I've done that, I've often been the only man that's there. And transparently, my wife does probably a little bit more of that. But I think even that, there's an underlying piece of that which says even in a career, a STEM career, you can prioritize family. And so I think that to me is probably another kind of undercurrent. Again, I don't do enough. I need to do more. I have shown up for career days multiple times, and I only made the mistake about being an astronaut once. I didn't make that a second time, but I do think there's a lot of stuff, a lot more I could be doing.
Great conversation, guys. We've got one more question and then we'll close out. I know you all have someone in mind, but can you share an example of one of your successful ally relationships that you've had, and what made it successful? What did you learn from it?
I mean, I can go first. I mean, I can't think of one. I have a number of examples where I grew up in India in a family where we were full of working women, and my grandmom was a teacher. My mom was a typist who retired as an analyst later on, and it was just I was kind of surrounded by working women in many professions that it was just what was normal for me when I was growing up, right? So as you kind of come in and look at kind of where we are as a society broadly, I would just kind of reinforce what has worked for me personally is just focusing on things that we talked about around staying humble, making sure that you have a meritocracy driven organization. We talked about the unconscious bias and the power of everybody to have equal access to decision making and learning and development, right? All those things put together are critical when we think about what has worked. I mean, for me personally, what has worked for me across my career. And we've had a number of examples where this really built an inclusive culture that's representative of who we want to be, both from a business and output perspective, but also from a societal perspective.
So I gave an example earlier in terms of kind of the interview prep and walking them through and then helping them collect and collate and then advocating on behalf. So that would be somebody I consider that I would have sponsored. But I also had multiple examples, especially when I led in the field, of getting people promoted from organizations into organizations that were a little bit more heavily male. And a lot of that actually started by doing these, what I call motivator conversations. It's a lot easier to have like an emotionally connected conversation with somebody that looks like you. So one mistake I made was going too quick with somebody who didn't before I had established enough trust that they could be honest. But once I knew what they wanted out of life and their experiences and how it all layered together. So again, it was very personal. It wasn't like what the journey looks like. It was personal journey to them. It might have fit within the walls of that, but it was very personal to them. Then I was able to like build the structure and the organization and the belief in themselves with that in mind in order to help them progress their career. So it wasn't my career path. It wasn't me saying, well, I've always wanted to do X and Y, or you must want to do this because I've done it before. It was extraordinarily personal to them. So I won't give the name or the example, but somebody who, again, I spent a lot of time with trying to understand what they were interested in. They were interested in new and unique and different and leadership. Like those were the things that they wanted. And we were standing up a new and unique and a different leadership team. But it was also somebody who wasn't gifted at interviews and who didn't really want to practice the interviews, didn't understand how that was going to be able to help them in the process. We're in the pandemic, so everything is virtual. And so being able to spend a lot of time and say, you want this, this is exactly what you described. This is the job that you're interviewing for. And these are the steps we're going to take to get there. So you may not enjoy it, but I have a really good understanding of who you are and what you strive to be. And so that person was able to get into that role and get promoted into that role. And it was, again, I don't think they would have been embracing of it had I not spent the time up front. And again, I think in some cases I've moved too fast where I'm like totally an open book and they're like, whoa, wait a second. Like, let's hold back. I don't want to have, church and state totally cross there. But so I think it's a little bit there, but I do start with like truly trying to understand what somebody's motivated by. That's one example. I've done that a number of times. But I do think that's a part of it, because then you can frame up the structure in the organization and the situational issues that will come up in a way that is meaningfully impactful to them, that you can help guide them.
One example that comes to mind for me was, it was during a pitch for a client, and no secret, we pitch clients all the time. And one of my colleagues, lady was on the team, and before the pitch, we were preparing, and she had a lot of phenomenal ideas, but in the meeting, she wouldn't disclose any of the ideas in terms of strategy, the number of people, where she saw the case going, the benchmarks, that were included. And I outed her in the meeting every single time. I said, well, such and such thought of, or said this, and she thinks blah, 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 and she was just looking at me. And so as the meeting kept progressing, I said, well, such and such, and let's say I'll call her Joanne. Well, Joanne, you had some thoughts on this too, didn't you? And so she'll look at me and she'll speak. And then, it just kept going on and on to get to the point where she just started speaking up, right? And then in subsequent pitches, I didn't have to do that anymore. I did it like twice in two pitches. But after that, she just spoke up and she just took over and took control. I did that, A, because I knew she would kill it, right? You put the person in a position for success. But B, I recognize that there was that sort of, I would say, wall, right, or hurdle that she needed to get over to recognize that her voice would be heard and it would be recognized, right, and considered. And now I can't stop her from talking.
That's awesome. Well, 628, I'd like to thank everyone, all the attendees, the panelists, the sponsors, everyone I thanked at the beginning, just repeat. Thank you so much for taking the time tonight to be with us here talking about this topic. All the individuals that gave us questions and everything. So thank you so much, everyone.
Hey,
wish you all
Ben.
well. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. Can I leave us with a parting thought, though?
That would be good, because I'm not good at it.
No, I wanted to say this, and this is, I did a little research, and there's this phrase called show up and show out, right? That, my friends and I and my family use. And I will tell you, when women enter the door into that room of STEM, they show up and they show out, right? On major levels. The contributions of women in STEM, when they enter the conversation, right, I think trump those of men, both directly and indirectly. Here are some examples. So the first computer programmer, a woman. Chemist who cured leprosy, a woman. Mathematician who worked as a NASA scientist and analyzed the flight paths for NASA spacecraft. The movie, was made after her, Hidden Figures, a woman. Chemist who discovered the molecular structure for DNA, a woman. And then the person who discovered the structure for insulin, a woman. And most recently, a woman behind one of the 2 or 3 vaccines for COVID, Moderna, a woman, right? We have so many, and those are just a few examples of the women in STEM who are at the top of their fields. So it's not about ability, right? It's not about skill set or intellect. Again, it is about exposure, it is about awareness, and it's about representation.
Couldn't have done it better myself. So I'm gonna double click out of that.
Thank you all.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
that.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.